Thank you so much, Rosalie. That's very kind of you to say that. Yes, so my name's Mark Sampson. I'm the director of Rooted Good, along with two other colleagues who I think are also on this call. And yes, I'm also a sort of part-time theologian, I guess, as well. And as you probably can tell from my accent, I am from Britain. And I moved, my dwelling place is now in Michigan, and of the last couple of months. So I'm kind of experiencing all of this, parts of these conversations in a new way and being rooted in this land. And I'm encouraged by Jed's admonition to own the ugly. I think being a white British male might sort of be the ticket on that. And so I'm just acknowledging that at the beginning of this conversation. Um, and yeah, I'm really excited by this. Part of what I'm going to be doing over the next few months and years, hopefully, is going to be curating some of the economic theologies aspect of this faith and finance conversation. And we're really interested in how this is going to develop. And we're just so delighted with the tone and the content of this opening discussion. So I really want to thank Edgar and Jed for that. I believe that you guys have modeled how we like this conversation to continue, that you've both wrestling with systemic and structural issues about, our current economic systems and capitalism, but also the injustices in our institutions. But you've done that also in a deeply personal way. And I just really want to thank you for that. And it means a lot to me, and it means a lot to all of us that you've brought yourselves fully into this conversation. And we just want this to be a space that continues to do that, where we can be wrestling with the systemic and the structural, but also recognize that's always deeply connected to the personal and our own journeys. And I want to thank you for how you've had the conversation, but also I think you've pointed the way for us from where we need to begin as well. And Edgar, I just really want to thank you for showing us that we've got to be really honest about the starting points of these conversations. And your honesty around the wealth and where wealth comes from, and the deep injustices in that story. And that if our starting point is not grief and lament, then are we ever going to get where we need to go, both personally and in terms of the conversation? And I think I'm a Christian theologian, and I think particularly for those of us from the Christian tradition need to pause and stop and acknowledge not just that we've been silent around these issues for many years, but that we've been complicit and we've been proactive in these injustices and inequities surrounding economics and wealth and money. And of course, the irony and the tragic irony of that is that there's immense resources in the Bible and in the Christian tradition that speak of a radical alternative to what we've been complicit in. And of course, there's also a massive diversity of Christian communities and Christian traditions. And whilst my own has been complicit, there's been others that have, in the monastic communities, in African American and in other communities, which has had a different economic narrative and a different understanding of all of these things. And so in the Christian tradition, there's this tension of what's our starting point. And I think, thank you for acknowledging the significance of the grief and lament for where things have come from. But also, I think both of you said, and it's very interesting, I think Jed, you said at the beginning, before we talk about money, we need to talk about separation, which is fascinating. And Edgar, in the same way, your narrative of this from separation to togetherness, to reciprocity and mutuality, this narrative that both of you spoke about, that before we talk about money and wealth, we need to step back and ask these deep questions about what does it mean to be human? And I love that, Jed, in your book, The Purpose of Capital, you genuinely go back to the beginning. Like you say, okay, we're going to have to start at the very beginning to unpick this understanding of how capital has come to function in the way it has today, and therefore how we might reimagine it. And Edgar, your phrase, all my relations, being this wonderful sort of shorthand for the integrated, holistic picture that both of you point towards in your work, and this move from separation to this. And I think there's such rich framing, resources, ways of thinking, imagination in that to help us frame our sort of theological response. So how might we, from faith traditions and faith communities, with this kind of theologic, God thinking, I guess, and understanding who God is and what God has done in the world, how might we reform personally our own economics, and as practitioners around innovation, what we create in the world, but also the systems and structures of the economics in which we function. So I am delighted to pass over this conversation to Kenda. And Kenda, before you respond, I invite you to respond as you'd like to Jed and Edgar's work and what they spoke so eloquently about earlier. I'd invite you to just say a little bit about yourself and what you're currently doing, where you are, and how you sort of interact with this conversation. Kenda.
Yeah, thank